Part 3. Gaps and Gems. When we look closely at our story, they have two parts. One is narrative, or a typical story that has characters and actions. It is focused on the interconnection of parts. When that is the case, we call it story. The story also depends on shared knowledge of descriptions of how things function. We call these our inner maps. Maps do not necessarily show interconnection, but are focused on descriptions and a more technical understanding. Those descriptions may or may not obviously relate to other things. The story of Zozvrm has both stories and maps. Gaps and Gems is an inner map where we describe how we interact with information. All information is given to us through our senses and processed in the mind. How we receive and process our diet of information has a significant effect on us. We get a handle on what we are talking about if we consider how much stuff is in the universe. Can any one person keep track of it all? Can we know everything about everything? Now, this seems ridiculous, and of course it is. It's very clear that we cannot know everything no matter how smart we are. But where exactly is that limitation? And what is its impact on us? For all intent purposes, the total information available to humanity is infinite. In every moment of every day, we are met with infinite information. Even in something as simple as taking a walk in the woods, we come in contact with an infinite amount of information. Trees, bushes, small plants, insects, 100 varieties, birds and other animals, each of which live in relation to one another and have their own life cycles, have their own properties. Some people spend their whole life studying the characteristics and processes that are going on in such a place. They pull volumes of information out of the same patch of forest we may walk by every day. Now multiply that times all the environments and interactions possible across a lifetime, and we get a sense of why we need limitations. We just cannot handle all of the potential information that is actually in front of us. In a way, the total reality is always before us. However, nearly all of it is hidden. The beauty of this arrangement is that at any time we can find new and interesting observations and connections. We find with close observation that anything we put our attention on has the possibility of an infinite depth of information, not just about the thing itself, but also from its connection to everything else. This infinite complexity is always in front of us and must be simplified by our senses. It must be because we would be overwhelmed otherwise. Then, in the best-case scenario, our minds present that simplified world to us in a way we can understand. We then experience the world at a level compatible with our senses, our inner maps and stories. If not, as in the example of the spectrum of light, we don't see it, where we see only a small portion of the spectrum of light in the electromagnetic fields. Other information is similar. If someone talks to us in a language we don't understand, we may see the body language but have no idea what is being said. Even when we know the language, cultures can be so different that miscommunication is a major hurdle. When we come across something that we don't understand, what is happening is the information presented to us is not compatible with our inner map of the world. The gap between the total possible information that is presented to us and what we understand is the first transmission gap. The first transmission gap is the observation that the information brought into our perception does not represent total understanding. We get from it what we can. With some inspection, we learn that many of the things we think we know well are in fact filled with things we do not. Ideas we rely on are riddled with assumptions, inaccuracies, and misconceptions. Yet it is the best we can do. Our walk through the forest is not impacted in any way by all those unknown bits. We see the beauty and appreciate what's there, with enough knowledge to get us safely on our way, until what we know is not enough, when something from the unknown is suddenly important, much like making a wrong turn on the path and getting lost in the woods. There is, at the edge of the known and unknown, our forming of ideas is the weakest. We experience a tremendous distortion of what we do not yet understand well. The mind grasps with imagination, attempting to translate the experience into something useful. Every transmission of information is insight, or has the potential to be insight, that at the very least can lead to greater clarity, a better model. It is human nature to push into the unknown and explore. What makes us unique among animals is that our exploration is primarily in the information realm. We are, especially in this age, skilled information foragers. As we explore the unknown, over time, what was drawn with loose imagination becomes clearer, more predictable, and better understood. The boundary of the unknown is pushed back a little by little from year to year, from generation to generation. We find our way out of the forest. But we bring with us new information from a part we had not explored before. As a result of the first transmission gap, our understanding will then be filled with many inaccuracies and misconceptions. This means no matter how well we think we know something, there are faults in our understanding in vast unexplored areas that are yet unknown to us. All of our stories are just pieced together memories of what has come through the first gap. Fortunately, even though it's full of holes, that model allows us enough information to act and live in our lives. Our stories need enough stability to give us confidence in our actions and enough flexibility to allow us to learn. The important lesson we learn from the first gap is this: that the full extent of our understanding is half-truth. Why half-truth? Because we need enough confidence in ourselves to be able to function and make decisions. We need enough humility to learn from every interaction. Our senses and mind have ranked some input over others. What is experienced as most relevant is driven by a set of filters we may or may not be aware of and are largely beyond our control. What we influence is said to constitute our values, itself being brought about by our story. This is part of everyday life. Say we are looking for a missing shoe. We look and look again in our living space. We cannot find it. Another person walks in the room and picks it up. The shoe has been in front of us the whole time. Why did we not see it? We had the strong intention of seeing the shoe. We looked and looked for it. Something within us was filtering our perception in contrast to our desired outcome, finding the shoe. If our filters can cause us not to see, even when we are actively looking for something we know is there, how much more are we blinded when we're not looking? When our filters and our aim, meaning what we're looking for and finding the shoe, are aligned, we experience the sense that there is nothing of importance to experience. For the most part, this sense serves us well. In some cases, it keeps us from important discoveries about ourselves. This is why experiencing ourselves in a steady state of half-truth is important. The inner rankings and filtering that occurs can cause serious distortion in how we experience things. We can observe that the same action can be experienced as beautiful and meaningful at some times, and at others it can be horrific and hurtful. The central need is to be aware of our filters. Being aware of our filters does not make them good or bad. When our values impact others in a negative way, it's called bias. We need to be careful here, as what is biased to one group is sacred to another. What this means for us is to be on the lookout for how we impact those around us. To be able to see from multiple perspectives is a primary mark of maturity. Coming to interactions with others with an inner framework of half-truth can facilitate the growth needed to view the world through another's perspective. Personal growth and maturity happens through a set of predictable stages, discussed in detail in another lesson. To summarize here, when we are young, we see the world as simple. As we grow and come in contact with the great complexity that is this life, it's no wonder that many seek refuge in what is felt to be the perfection of simplicity. We hand our story-making over to institutions of like-minded individuals and gain a community. This as a whole is a beautiful and important step in our development. In these communities, ideas of perfection are instituted. We are taught ideas that if we could live and embody with perfection, would leave us in a state of total happiness. Perfection being a state from which no improvement can be made. At these stages of development, striving towards these ideals has real merit. However, at some point, many run into a crisis. That is, that no experience we have is perfect. No person, no institution, no experience with anything is perfect. Nothing occurring in the natural world exists as a state of absolute perfection. This discovery can come with a lot of pain and disillusionment. We may not know what to do with our concept of God as our ideal of perfection. It may be something we put off as unreal or unimportant. The experience of divine perfection as a presence may be something we hold on to. Or we make God as something not of this world. This otherworldly being is perfect, while nothing in our experience is perfect. Here is the first gem. God is not perfect. God is an artist, the source of all possibility. All that we experience has variation. That variation is an essential part of existence. In human experience, that variation is experienced as creativity and art. God, being the highest embodiment of values, has as a core trait creativity. Perfection, from this view, is a low-resolution view of a thing. At closer inspection, everything has variation. Variation shows a thing's potential. Therefore, God, the source of all, is a source of all possibility and potential. The idea of perfection happens only in the imagination and nowhere else. It is a useful tool of development. On the other hand, if we measure ourselves against perfection, then we are doomed for failure, as it is a gross misunderstanding of who we are. We are pieces of art. We are also the artists. Art is not measured as good or bad, but is only to be appreciated. All art has beauty. The art that is us is always changing. Some questions that we can start asking ourselves are, to what extent is this art, that is me, producing happiness? Am I appreciative of all aspects of my art, the parts I like and the parts I do not? Can I be more accepting of myself? Am I an active participant in generating the person I want to be? And since I'm the artist, what are the traits I would like to develop? We are not simply good or bad persons, but a complex being made of many, often competing perspectives. If this is true of you, then it is true of me. This leads to the second gem. People are messy. We often put people in categories of good and bad. Then we are surprised when they do things out of character for who we thought they were. It is our story that is inaccurate, not the person. Every person, no matter what position in society, is messy. No matter how holy or upstanding, no matter how terrible and twisted, no matter how rich or poor, powerful or powerless, every person is messy, having the same complexity we each experience. Our shared messiness bonds us as humans, is a source of instant compassion to whatever joy or pain another is experiencing. The messiness of people is to acknowledge that we are all made of multiple competing forces, and that those competing forces are central to the human condition. We can experience the messiness of humanity not as a threat, but as a fantastic part of nature. When we begin to look outside ourselves, it looks like the competing of multiple forces is a universal trait of existence. Take the wind, for example. What we are feeling is the shift in bodies of air of different temperatures and air pressure. The wind itself is further affected by layers of additional forces, such as altitude, mountains, ocean temperatures, and the very rotation of the earth. Even with all this information, the wind still baffles us at times. Variation comes from sources still unknown and unanticipated. We can, it seems, strive for greater and greater clarity of understanding of anything. We are in continuous experimentation where there is always the possibility of being surprised by the outcome. This is the third gem. God is tricky. Where we may see something as straightforward, there is always the possibility of a lesson that we did not anticipate. It can be that we did not know that it could do that, or that we discover meaning. The wind can whip us around and nearly push us over when we don't expect it. or it can bring a sweet smell that reminds us of a deeply meaningful moment. This often happens when reading a text that is special to us. After reading it again for the 100th time, a passage strikes us with complete newness, in ways and in connections that are meaningful, if only to us. Life is going to have lots of chaos and surprises. It is the nature of nature. To view the unexpected as playful trickiness is to frame our experience as something to learn from. Even if the thing that happens to us is horrible, painful, and repulsive at the time, there is always a possibility that at some point, when we are ready, where every experience is a valued piece of the art that is us, we may be surprised by our own beauty. Our beauty stems from a tricky source. As we contemplate our lives, we can observe that every interaction, every thought we've had changes us, even if it's very slightly. Most things we do are a continuation of some pattern we have. What we do in the morning, what things we like to eat, the people we talk to and have connections to, the regular routine of life. But sometimes an interaction will have lasting impact on us. It can change our point of view. The most lasting of those comes with not just changing our point of view, but the new ability to clearly see from multiple perspectives. For instance, we may know and interact with a person who seems to have given themselves over to an addiction. It can be very painful to watch. They act to preserve the addiction at all costs, hurting everyone around them. The opinion we make are based on our perceptions of the situation. They are bad, and we are good, even if we have sympathy for them. But what happens when we get to know them? Know that they feel out of control. They don't want to do what they do, but are internally compelled to in a way we did not know was possible. When we get a deeper insight into the mechanisms of addiction, we can see that the person is in a losing battle with themselves. They are trapped. They may see no hope, no way out. Giving over to the addiction is a rational thing to do if everything else is more painful and pointless. Now, we're not making judgments on the perspective. The point is that in getting to know others, we can come to understand different perspectives than our own, and taking of multiple perspectives at the same time is a hallmark of personal maturity. Then next time we come into contact with someone who seems to be struggling in a similar way, we can have greater compassion. The perspective taken from our previous experience can inform our new one and ease the addition of getting to know another person. The addition of new perspectives can come with challenges, especially with strongly held beliefs and perspectives. If something shatters our story of how the world works, our world may feel like it's falling apart, leaving us to pick up the pieces and stitch together a new story. Sometimes this happens multiple times over a lifetime. Divorces, world events, betrayals, and near-death experiences can be catalysts. Also, spiritual insight, intellectual shifts in beliefs, and transcendent experience with the divine. They too can provide opportunity for growth. They can reshape how we view and experience the world. On the other hand, if we don't know that the information we have is at all times limited, we can take our model to be the whole truth. When that is the case, our brilliant minds will bend our experience to meet and support the model. If our model never updates sufficiently, over time, we lose the ability to interact with reality. Our ability to manage ourselves and our relationships deteriorate. In extreme cases, we are a threat to our own survival. We all know people, possibly loved ones, that have gone down this road. It does not mean that it's theirs or anyone's fault, but it still happens. The question is, what in our own story can be improved? How can we more accurately update our stories for our own happiness and for those around us? We acknowledge that our mind has two competing settings, flexibility and inflexibility. A balance of skill with both is needed to successfully move through life. Our mind has two broad modes. One is to take information from experience and incorporate it into our inner map and story of who we are and how the world works. The second is to take our inner map and story and then fit information from our experience to support our story, to confirm that our map is correct. When we have these life experiences that provide opportunities for growth, both modes of mind are in play. We are at the same time updating and confirming. Have we noticed that some of us with more senior years are sometimes frustrated that things are not the way we think they should be, showing that a lack of confirmation of our inner story can be hard to live with? Then others of us with similar years seem to flow with whatever is happening. Very little seems to bother us, and happiness and love are regularly expressed. We can see that high-functioning inner models have the traits of both being highly detailed and high in flexibility. Achieving those traits does not have to be accidental. They can be cultivated intentionally at any age. This is discussed in more detail in another session. All of us interact with other people. In those interactions, we're going to share our stories with one another. Talking and sharing our lives with people is a necessary part of life, a fundamental part of our emotional and mental health. However, what goes on in our heads is more complicated than what we can talk about. Experience has so many layers of meaning that we are continuously discovering them for ourselves. Sharing our knowledge with others is itself a tricky activity. We have to pick what is most important. Of the most important things we know, do we have the language to share them? Are there words that seem adequate? For simple things like basic math and greetings, then yes. How about a sunrise? What about the relationship with a parent, a friend, spouse? What happens to words when we express or experience the infinite wisdom within? The divine presence that produces awe and wonderment? Words fail miserably to express such ideas, such understanding. There is always a gap between what we understand and what we communicate. This is the second gap. This gap, properly acknowledged, is to understand that the full extent of our communication is quarter truth. Everything that can be said or written is at most quarter truth. There are no exceptions. From the most mundane to the most beloved sacred writing, quarter truth is all we have to work with. This limitation is built into the system. Whatever our experience, say looking at a sunrise, the experience is layered in the fine details of what we are seeing, the feeling of our body, the emotional state we are in, and the various meanings of the experience competing for space in our being. To communicate this, we have to choose what is most relevant and then match the unsaid experience into symbols of language. Some of those matches are better than others. We can tell when we have not communicated well. There's a feeling that it's not quite what I meant. We could overcompensate for it by writing a lot, writing hundreds of pages on one part of that experience of a sunrise would not truly convey our experience. We could paint paintings, write plays, perform music, or any number of artistic endeavors to try and capture the essence of our sunset. All communication in this sense is art. The purpose of art is to reveal the inner nature of reality through outer expression. Art is the expression of reality transmitted through the person. Such expression is fundamental to the self-aware. With whatever is being communicated, we then have to receive it. This is why listening is such an important skill. The receiving end of communication is a game of educated guessing. We are always filling in the parts that are not communicated. When someone says sunrise, we fill in the parts that are not spoken with our own experience. We do this without even noticing. For a person who enjoys waking up early, sunrises can be invigorating. For those of us who love night, sunrises can be exhausting. When we read sunrise, we have the felt influence of our own experience. We hear and experience our life, not necessarily as it is, but as we are, from our own background. That background may or may not match in any way what the speaker is trying to communicate. In the quarter truth that is communication, a posture of humility is required. Our assumptions are going to be wrong much of the time. We can cultivate skills of inquiry and be watchful for miscommunication and misunderstanding. Even with the half-truth of understanding and the quarter truth of communication, It is this ability to share information among people that has been a driving force shaping humanity. It is a founding characteristic of intelligent life. By these limitations, we are forced to choose to express the most relevant part of our experience in the most effective ways we know how. Across time and place, the information shared is tested against our collective experience. Take math, for example. Various societies have come up with different ways of measuring and accounting for their things. Humanity did not start out with mathematics as we have it today. Counting and the ways of calculating are discovered. Over millennia, the base 10 counting system we now use came into general use because it worked the best for the most people across time and place. Those things that stay relevant across time and place are experienced as true. The project of humanity across all the ages is to find truth and hold on to it. What then is truth?